So it's hard to make this video and not seem arrogant or disrespectful or offensive, maybe. And I don't intend it to be that, but I intend it to work through some things in my own head. And also, as I often do, to follow a logical thread that I can't help but believe seems to be true. So I'll start with a quick story. Stupid story, but a quick story. A few years ago, my refrigerator flooded. It had like a water line connected to it, and it flooded. And I had to redo all the floors in my house, or most of the floors. And I was bringing in a bunch of different people to get prices and quotes, and I wanted to do tile floors. Not that it matters, but anyways, so I brought in one particular guy, and he told me, your baseboards are too low. So like my heating baseboards, he was like, they're too low. If you want to put in tile floors, you're gonna have to raise those up. So he left, and other people came in, and I ended up using somebody else to do the tile floors, but I still listened and raised those baseboards because I thought, well, that's an issue, right? That I have, so I need to bring somebody in. So I brought a plumber in, spent a couple $1,000s, and they did the work and they raised the baseboards, and then I used somebody else to put in the tile floors. And one of the things that always stuck with me was I remember my cousin, who I speak to a lot, was kind of like a brother to me. I remember him saying to me, like, I think that's super strange that you raise the baseboard still. And I was like, well, why? He's like, well, you didn't use that guy to actually do your floors, so why would you listen to him about the baseboards? And it turned out my cousin was right and the guy was wrong. I didn't need to raise the baseboards. They actually look pretty ridiculous right now because they're super high. They're the highest baseboards I've ever seen. There was no need to actually do that. And his point was like, why would you listen to somebody that you don't trust? Why would you listen to somebody that you don't think is qualified or has the right thought process or whatever it is to do the job you need to be done? Why would you still listen? So I tell that story because I find myself thinking about that these days. I'm at a point in life where I'm seriously considering making some big changes. Quitting my job, trying to pursue something that I'm more passionate about. This whole path that I've been on with the podcast and other things that I do, in many ways, I recognize it's kind of counter to the kind of traditional path that most people follow. And as you might imagine, I get a lot of pushback from people on it. And I don't disparage that at all. For many of it, it's family, it's friends, it's coworkers, it's people I care about, and I know care about me, and I know they're looking out for my best interest. Specifically, I just had a conversation with a coworker recently where they were kind of laying out for me why it might not be a good idea. Why, given my family situation, my wife has some health issues and I have a young child and everything else going on, it might not be a good idea. And went as far to say, like, listen, I get it. Sometimes you want to follow your passions in life. You want to do different things, but more or less, sometimes you have to settle. And it made me think of that situation because there's a part of me as he was explaining it that found myself thinking like, well, yeah, there's a lot of logic to that and there's truth and maybe you do have to settle and maybe it's not the most responsible thing to do and maybe it's too risky for me to leave my job. But then I found myself thinking, and this is kind of the disrespectful or offensive part, and I don't mean it to be, like, is that person that's giving me the advice, are they qualified to do that? Like, when I look at their life, do they seem to have figured it out? Do they have all the answers? Do they seem to be optimizing their happiness and joy and fulfillment and contentment in life? And none of us are, I would argue, right? Most of us aren't. I don't think I am either. And the point isn't to knock that person or anybody who gives me advice. The point is to say, when you're looking to do something, and you have a vision of what that thing is, if somebody gives you input or advice or guidance that's counter to it, you have to check the source and say like, well, do they seem to have the answers? Do they seem to have figured this thing out? And if the answer is no, well then just like the tile guy who gave me bad advice about my baseboards, why would you listen to them? If they're not achieving the things you want to be achieving, if they don't have true happiness or true contentment in life, why would you assume that the advice is right? Right? It may be right, but don't assume that it is. You need to check that further. And if I have a belief that we shouldn't have to settle, or at least we shouldn't settle for settling, right? We should do everything we could to try and reach that optimal peak in life. We should try and reach that optimal happiness, contentment, fulfillment, all those things. We may not get there, but we shouldn't assume we can't get there. We shouldn't just give up before we started. If that's my belief, if somebody challenges that belief and says, actually, you do have to settle, well, I should only listen if I believe like they've figured something out. And in this case, I don't think that they have. So again, no disrespect to anybody, but I don't want to end up with ridiculously high looking baseboards, metaphorically, for my life. I want to try and figure it out in a way that I think makes sense to me, or at least be as logical about it as I can. So that kind of stupid story just made me think about it and remember that maybe there's a better path here. And although there's going to be friction, there's going to be people that question it. There's going to be people that give me different advice. I should listen to it. I should take it in, but I should remember to check that source. I should remember to think about, is that person doing it right? Would they look at their life and say, yeah, I'm totally happy. Everything's great in my life? Because if it's not, well, then I have to call that advice into question a little bit and not just take it as a given.